Just a sec.
Hello, everybody. Hi to all panelists and our viewers. We are the Environment and Social Issues Cluster at Nickel-Lindyne. Nickel-Lindyne is the Research and Publication Forum at Center for New Economic Studies. We are the Environment and Social Issues Cluster, and we hold this roundtable today on the theme, the unplanned urban and environment in the context of India. So just before we begin, I just like to give a brief introduction into what this topic entails. Cities are often characterized as spaces of growth and opportunities, and for some they are also spaces of emancipation. But this romanticized approach of looking at cities restricts one from looking at cities, at the structure of cities from a more objective point of view. With an ever-increasing pressure on our cities, it then becomes pertinent to explore what the state does in order to ensure a planned growth of our cities. And over-rising growth of our cities also poses a threat to the environment, and hence it becomes even more important to place the environment at the core while imagining a planned city. This roundtable is a move in that direction to initiate a conversation about the future of cities in India and the required environmental focus that is essential in planning a city. So without further ado, I'd request Rajat to open the panel with the first question. And yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Krishano, for the introduction. So as you all know, cities, not only in India, but also in all the colonies, were planned in a way to keep a certain section of population away from the ruling class, and that kind of became a trend even post-independence in most of the countries. So it becomes even much more important to discuss how the future of cities can be imagined and how we can plan cities in a better way. But at the same time, being a part of the environmental cluster, we think it's also very much important to look at the planning from an environmental point of view, right? So the first question to the panel will be, do you think that the planned cities in India, which have been planned hitherto to now, reflect a sound approach towards the environment? And yeah, the stage is open. Anyone who wants to address the question is free to answer. Yeah.
Can I go ahead?
Yeah.
So according to me, I think it's not an easy approach, right? There are some situations where, of course, you can say that they've taken care of the environment, but more or less it feels like they haven't. They haven't taken the environment into account while thinking of especially a planned city from an urban point of view. So if you see a lot of ads nowadays they talk about skyscrapers, they talk about buildings which have private pools, buildings which have the water source in those type of buildings where they portray private pools, the needs for garden fountains and so on, and they make it enticing to the city. But little do we realize that from the environment point of view, that water to create the pools and to create the fountains actually come from the rivers and the lakes within cities and within states. And I think there was a huge controversy in Maharashtra in 2005 where there was a major drought in the city. And one of the main causes was that the water wells and the water rivers, the lakes had completely dried out because a large chunk of the water had been used for such projects such as making private pools to fund one of the largest water parks they were trying to create. And because of that, the water in the wells dried up and it created a massive drought where agriculture stopped for a really long time. And it begs to question that why are we creating such, infrastructure, such things which actually are not helping the environment in a lot of ways. And it's not only with water, like water is one of the things. We've also seen with the Array colony, which was a huge case in Bombay, where to create metro, which is a huge part of a planned city nowadays, to create metros. But the metro creation, in fact, led to, destroying of trees because they cut down around 3,000 to 2,000 to 3,000 trees just to get space to construct those metros. And that doesn't, just because the metro seems like a great idea, doesn't mean that it compensates for the loss of environment that the metros are creating. So I don't think, at least in a majority of projects, they don't take into account the environment, but they make the project so enticing that the environment just becomes a small price to pay for the benefits that the people are getting. So yeah.
Thank you, Shreya. There were some wonderful insights. So we have Ashika raising her hand. Any point you'd like to add to that, Ashika? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
And Ashish can
I
follow.
think I think when we're talking, especially in India's context, we have to think about the fact that when India started, the rise of the urban like sort of landscape came along with an influence of Western culture, where all the I think the amenities that Shreya was talking about came about. So the environment wasn't really the focus. So I think that could sort of playing the devil's advocate. While I understand that environment is a major concern, it wasn't back then because of these differences in development levels and what India was aspiring to be. They couldn't be at the along with developing the environment, it came at a trade-off. So I think that could sort of explain the current situation we are seeing in India.
Thank you, Ashika. Ashish, you have the floor.
Yes, so the present has been talked about, but if we consider that how this all came along, like how we chose the model of development that we did, I think we have to go back to the roots by like in the 1950s. So, like when India was taking up this rapid urbanization and industrialization, I think environment was not the priority at that time. The priority was squeezing the resources of the environment and sort of plugging the resource gap in the cities and villages to bring people on an equal term, and then environment can be looked after later. That's how the model of development worked. But it was envisaged that a transition would come when a certain threshold of development is achieved. But even when that was done, the transition did not happen, or it was incomplete, because then the model of development was so entrenched in the bureaucracies, in the city local administrations, etc., that it was taken that squeezing the environment is the norm. You cannot have a sort of a welfareist state and development and progress and prosperity without sort of bending the environment to your advantage. We can see this in how we are sort of spreading tourism in the national parks. That's like totally antithetical to the creation of national parks. So in the same way, like the way we construct roads, etc., it's taking like one mono perspective of industrialization and not the environment. And to bring about a transition would cause havoc, because then it would sort of, you'll have to change the entire supply chains, create carbon sink and all that. And the benefits of that will be visible not like less than 5 electoral cycles later. So that's also a big disincentive.
Yeah. So I guess we can move to the next round of question if no one has anything to add. So yeah, interestingly enough, you guys brought up the point of historical roots and how the cities in the contemporary world are being imagined, right? But also the point is right now, a lot of southern urban theorists based out of India and other southern countries are also arguing to look at the cities from a very specific point of view. So the entire history reflects kind of way of imitating the cities of the West. But right now there is a huge push towards imagining the cities from the southern point of view, which is important indeed. But again, that begs the question that what is the harm in learning from the best global trends, right? So there are instances in the global history where a lot of cities have planned in a very nuanced way, maintaining the environmental concerns. So the next question would be, what are some of the key global trends in terms of planning cities? What are the key examples which also take in account the environmental concerns and the needs of the contemporary world? Yeah, the floor is open again. So anyone who would like to add? Yeah, Ashish, go on.
Yes. So Uh, I will add a caveat before I go on. So the people, the cities who are actually sort of bringing in these sustainable legislations and practices into building infrastructure and etc. They can do it because they can afford to do so. Plus, they have the capacities to do so in terms of changing the supply chains and all that. And also, they have attained, again, my last hypothesis, they have attained the level of development now that they can change the direction of further development. So now that said, some of the recent trends which I have seen are, of course, so there are regulations on the amount of petrol you can sort of you consume in a certain month in a city, and then there are also regulations regarding the number of, like, you cannot cut trees for building infrastructure, or you need like rigid permissions for that, and then of course there are emission norms which are very strict in a few countries of the West. So that's 3 points, and also like there are, like, you have to build a carbon sink every time you're building infrastructure, and then you cannot like just like something that happens in India, you cannot like burn sort of garbage on the road or anywhere, like anyhow you have to like uh, process it, and then like you have to treat it in a process. You cannot like burn it anywhere and turn it into smoke. So these are a few very strict regulations, which a lot of them actually also exist in India, but the implementation gap is the gap, and the implementation cannot happen until the mentality is changed. And for the changing the mentality, you have to bring about the transition, which is a big policy shift in itself.
Thank you, Ashish. Ashika, you had something to add?
Yeah, another trend that I'm seeing is, regarding population density, especially since Ashish had brought up the implementation point. I feel like it's easier to, there are many policies about, starting a local farm in a small, like, rural setting in India. It's like sort of these grassroots level projects. And the reason they're easier to implement is because it's a small group of people. And there, I think I forget the name of the city, but they're strictly controlled their, population, kind of kept it low, and the area is low. So like policies like, let's say, implement strict implementation of, usage of public transport, or the local green energy systems at every home. All these are easier to implement with less number of people. It's just a sort of a side point I noticed from the general trend.
Thank you, Ashika. Sudarshan, you wanted to add something. Go ahead.
First off, am I audible?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. So in terms of the trends that we have seen in the past few years, evolving with a certain amount of environmental consciousness, it's largely with concern to adequate formulation of city development strategies, which essentially involves a greater amount of participation and interaction between the environment and associated development stakeholders. And then there's a larger amount of involvement of people who are specialists in this area, in environmental conservation, development, economics, and the like, with the associated political leadership. And largely, there's also been a certain amount of increase in budgetary and fiscal provisioning for construction of these green areas and making provisions for these sustainable initiatives and so on. And in general, in terms of administration, we've also seen an increase in staffing in terms of city planners and so on. Large recruitment of city planners at a local level, a larger demand for them, and a larger decentralization of planning as well, in the sense that the master plans are loosely formulated at the larger level, but are successively implemented more at local levels. So larger decentralization is second, and as just mentioned, proper formulation of master plans, delineating what can be done where and what cannot be done. So I think these have been, in general, some of the important trends that have brought about some amount of sustainability in more of the developed countries and cities in the world.
Yeah, excellent points. In fact, yeah, the fact that you bring levels of, say, when we talk about planning, it actually reminds me of something. Reminds me of the draft master plan, right? Uh, Rajat here wrote a piece on that for Nickelodeon Times about the draft master plan in Delhi and how it accommodates or fails to accommodate certain interests. So, Rajat, would you like to chime in on that? How do you how do you see through that lens, urban planning through the lens of, say, something like a draft master plan 2041 of Delhi? Would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, like I was mentioning, so a lot of times, what has been the trend in terms of planning the cities, at least in India, has always been a push to imitate the Western cities, in a way, not realizing the specific needs of the time and of the location. So the time and space phenomenon here is of prime importance, and most of the time, these planners are also, the entire school of planning, the the thought of planning is not southern based, right? It's mostly Western ideas, and we are still relying on old schools like Chicago School of Planning and things like that, right? And on the face of it, the new plans might look like decentralized, but at the same time, one has to realize that those plans are made with a technocratic lens, right? At the end of the day, you can't expect a normal citizen of the city to go through a 500-page document and to understand what is happening in his or her own city. So for me, if you were to ask me, the plan has to be made more participatory, and the participation doesn't mean that you kind of give out the plan once it's made, right? People have to be the part of the planning process when the plan is being made, and not when the plan is out and then you are asking for suggestions and feedbacks. But again, I guess Ashika mentioned the point of scale, because the scale is such that it's near to impossible to include as everyone, but at the same time, a sound planner has to do that. Then there are cities in the West which have done that, but in India, one of the things is, as I was mentioning again, they do not realize the fact that our cities have something very particular, which is only there in India, right? So this whole notion of auto construction of city, it doesn't exist in West. The Western cities are well planned. They don't. So you won't see this phenomenon of auto construction of cities. People migrating in bulks from villages to urban areas, and then kind of making their own cities. So if you look at Chandigarh, Chandigarh was a well planned city, but the areas around it right now, like Zirakpur and Mohali, they are not planned. They are auto constructed, right? But no one is going to talk about the planning of those cities. So it's if you were to ask me, I would say that very much important. The first thing which one has to take in account is the fact that there is something particular to our cities, and a mere imitation of the Western ideas won't yield much. And as long as that trend continues, I don't see the future of cities being a secured one. And that's what I was mentioning in my article as well, that the approach towards health is not a sound approach, because we do not realize that the need is at the primary level and not at the tertiary level. At the primary level, you saw the collapse of healthcare infrastructure in Delhi because there were not enough PHCs. But because the idea of building modern hospitals comes from West, and building big hospitals at tertiary level, uh, so there is a collapse, there is a vacuum of some sort. And same goes with environment for that matter. uh, because we also have big jungles in our cities, and just because, as I guess Shreya was mentioning, the whole concept of beautification of cities, building gardens, building fountains right in between the cities, right? You are not understanding that our cities have something particular, and there is a need to run these ideas parallelly. So yeah, in an idealistic imagination, I would say that all of those things needs to be changed, but one has to wait and see how they're gonna make the change, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, great points. Actually, it binds together to what Sudarshan mentioned, right, about decentralization, how we need to involve voices from, say, not from the top echelon, but from people who have lived it, right? So it also brings me to a very interesting conception that James Scott. I think I may be wrong, but in James Scott's work, he mentions about state and planning, about how there is this need to, you know, to uh, to make things uniformalization. I think so, to follow a certain map of doing urban planning, of, say, we are having a particular city which looks like blocks instead of
Yeah.
anything else, right? So that is again interesting, because yes, you are trying to imitate the West, but you are also imposing the ideas which are not going to fit you. I mean, he contrasts it with images from, say, a locality where roads have been made by the movement of people, by the habitual movement of people, instead of, say, something that's been imposed by the state or created by the state itself. So
Yeah.
that's a good distinction, right? We need to look at how people have evolved culturally or historically to using the city uh, in a sustainable way, instead of just dismissing them and say, okay, we have to adopt, as you said, the Chicago School of Planning or something like that, taking it as benchmark or standard. So that is something that requires a little bit of consideration, right? So yeah, great points, wonderful points. Let's move on to our final question. Actually, uh, what are some of the environmental related concerns which you think should be part of a planned city? What are the things that the environment should have a part of in a planned city? Should it be more of, say, as Rajat said, public parks or commons in that sense, or should it be something that's left untouched? What is your conception of that? How do you bring in environment into your ideal planned city? Yeah.
Yeah, Ashish, go on.
I just think more cities should be built so that like you can depopulate the present cities, because what is to what do we do with the current environment that is in the city? So what exactly poses the threat to the environment? It is the population pressure. Without the demand of the population, you will not touch the environment logically, right? So if you depopulate, like if you build cities alongside cities, like
Is it me or is it frozen for everyone?
Yeah, he got cut off, I think. Yeah, let's just wait for him for a moment.
Maybe you can ask Sudarshan to go on, and then Ashish can join later, perhaps.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, sure. Sudarshan, you have the floor. Yeah, go on.
Okay. So what I've read, so we can clarify, we can sort of classify sections of environmental issues which related to urban planning into three, uh, largely with regards to the level at which they're concerned with. Local, regional, and global. That local issues are more concerned with issues like water, sanitation, and proper drainage systems in the design of the state. Regional environment issues involve those which affect the cities as a whole, uh, affect a particular city as a whole, and originate from different parts of the city. So there's intra-city environmental impact interaction, whereas it's largely confined to the bonds of cities. And this is largely concerned with a certain amount of air pollution in these cities. Uh, and finally, it's a certain type of air pollution. Sorry. And finally, it's global level environmental problems, which are which we can see that as in which is largely concerned with emissions, very toxic emissions and so on. And finally, also that affect outside affect geographical areas outside of the bounds of the city, like the release of industrial effluents into rivers and so forth. So I think with regards to the specificities that more should be taken into consideration. Yes. With local environmental issues, it's largely simple. The need is to construct better sewage systems, better drainage systems, and ensure that more households, especially in countries like India, have access to toilet bathroom infrastructure, so that the lack of which does not create a negative disproportionate environmental impact. And with regards to regional environmental issues, it's things like promoting more greener spaces, which as Rajat mentioned, there's definitely a trade-off involved over there. Research has also shown that to a certain amount, promotion to a certain extent of aesthetic appeal, and in general, the promotion of greener spaces has helped in improving the health of surrounding areas, and also in general helped sort of assuage the impact of surrounding emissions. And another consideration is the management of solid liquid waste, and most importantly, solid waste. In even major cities in India, we see a lot of these huge landfills that take up space here and there, which have everything from food dumps to industrial waste that's sort of piled up over there. Through legal or illegal means, whatever it may be. So it's the proper management of the same, and associated problem is obviously food distribution or so, which adds to this waste management. So managing supply chains, and this is a really interlinked space over here. There's an intersection of transportation management over here, which leads to a lot of wastage, and there's just in general solid waste management and the sort of the handling of waste generation and where waste is generated is waste, as in say to what part of the city is the waste generated going to in this part of the city going to be taken, and so on. And finally, and sort of most importantly, with regards to in terms of impact, it's industrial organization as to where industries are going to be located, and the balance of energy intensive and non-energy intensive industries, because obviously we cannot have crowding of industry, too much of energy intensive crowding of industries in certain ways. And it's also important that residential housing is largely separated from those places, because if it were to be brought to those places, pricing would obviously be affected, and it would lead to somewhat of a larger concentration of people who can be impacted by that, belonging to the lower socioeconomic strata of society, who obviously, as we have as experience and history, as are largely vulnerable to these problems, and even the exploitation of industrial power per se. So that's about it. Another small point is just food security and organization. As I mentioned before, it's the managing of supply chains properly so that food waste is sort of minimized and so. But that's about it.
Yeah, thanks, Sudarshan. Thanks for the expansive, overview of how we can correct whatever is wrong, or how we can aid the planning of the city. So yeah, so in interest of time, just keep your responses short. Yeah, Shreya, you can go ahead, and followed by Ashish. Yeah.
I just wanted to add to Sudarshan where I agree that, there's a level like we have to go with. But I think the main problem is that in a planned city, it's hard to coordinate people's demands. Right now, in a city like India, in a country like India, we have the urban population, which has already met the basic needs. So for them, the more important part is the beautification. And for them, they're going towards more like, reducing plastic. For them, that's more important. But for the rural, the basic facilities of getting water, getting food, that's not met. And until the needs and demands are aligned between the urban and the rural, no amount of planning will work without compensating without compensating with one person's demand and needs. And that's what we're seeing right now, where the urban population is getting what they want, while the rural or people who are struggling for the basic facilities are the ones getting affected. So unless we get them up, to the urban population and make sure that everyone is in level for what they want and demand, no amount of planning or, making sure anything will work out as much as we want it to. It might just be an idealized world.
A great point, Shreya. Actually, it again brings us up to basic social services and the provision of that, right? So, yeah, Ashish, would you take the last word here? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I apologize if there are background noises, guys. This is festivities time. Okay, so yeah, as I got cut off, but yeah, I'll try to sum up things. So, Rajat talked about the particular nature of Indian cities, right? I think there is one very important nature. No matter however you clean, beautify, plan, replan, reconstruct the cities, it's not going to work. Because, however, like whatever good you do, it's going to be undone by people pouring in from outside, because there are not opportunities in abundance proportionate to the population in the rural areas. So you have scope there that you can build infrastructure like in a planned manner, sustainability there. You can set up different supply streams. But in the cities, only when you build the rural areas can you depopulate the cities, and then you can implement your plans. Without that, it's not going to work. And the best example of this is the slums. I mean, worst example of this is the slums. The people from the rural areas who do not even find opportunities in the already saturated Indian cities build slums because they don't have any other option, and that leads to crime, and crime is of course antithetical to the environment. So that's all about it. And lastly, actually not lastly, this is all about it. Thank you.
So Krishna, if I may add a couple of points. Okay. So first of all, I was also saying this, as Shreya was mentioning, that demands of each and every individual or community for that matter are, very hard to achieve, even taking into consideration of the planning of the city. So same is the example. So recently when slums in Delhi, were being demolished, so there was a huge there was a large section of population which was saying that, these slums are posing environmental challenges to the already urban population. But that begs the question that who has the right over city, right? Those people who are living in slums, don't they have the right over city? So that's one point. So this is something which is all about trade-offs, and I think there is an opportunity where we, as I was saying, if you look at the particular nature of our cities, then only you can find the more practical solutions. Secondly, I would just to end the conversation, I would say that one of the mistakes which a lot of environmentalists, for that matter, make is the fact that they look at environment from just a physical point of view, right? So environment is not just something which you see. Environment is not just your trees or industrial waste. It's also the sense of belongingness. It's also the sense of living in a certain city in a certain way. So for a woman, right, you need to ensure that the city is safe. That's also a part of environment. So that also needs to come into this whole discourse of environment and the city. So moving from just a singular conception of environment and moving towards a more particular planning, taking in account the particular nature of a particular city. And I would just add one more point, that no city is similar to any other city. It's not just the debate between north and the south, right? If you look at Delhi can't be compared to Mumbai, and both the cities can't be planned on the same lens, right? So for that to happen, the planners need to engage much more than they are already doing. So I guess, yeah, that's from my side.
Yeah, that's a great point to end this discussion at. I just like to thank everybody for attending this, and I hope it has been enriching for the panelists, as it has been to me, and also for our viewers. So yeah, thank you all for joining. Until next time. Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.